Some terrible wildfires have been, in fact still are, ravaging Brazil's Amazon rainforest. Not uncommon in drier months, but this year, scientists are blaming the president's policies for the devastation. Are they right? Who is responsible? Welcome to Roundtable. Hello from me, David Foster. Of course, Brazil isn't the only country that hosts the Amazon, but it does have the biggest part of it, and the number of fires there is up 84% this year. Environmentalists are calling it a global emergency, and they say that the Brazilian government's policies are making everything worse. Who's let the rainforest down?
The lungs of the planet. The Amazon rainforest is burning at a record rate as thousands of fires rage through the world's largest tropical forest. According to Brazil's National Institute for Space Research, there have been 9,500 forest fires since August 15th alone. 72,000 fires have been recorded so far this year, an 84% increase on the same period in 2018. Deforestation isn't a new problem, but environmental activists and indigenous Amazonian tribes blame Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro's policies on farming and mining as the forest is burned to clear land for pasture and extraction, and loggers raze the forest for its wood.
We believe that the position of the Brazilian President Bolsonaro is inciting the producers to start fires. This type of criminal fire in the Amazon. It happens every year in the Amazon, but we haven't seen this type of fire before Bolsonaro. And we think that many mining companies and timber companies feel that Bolsonaro is supporting them in doing this.
France's president has accused Bolsonaro of not doing enough to protect the area and of lying about his government's environmental commitments. Public demonstrations have taken place in several major Brazilian cities, mirroring protests held elsewhere around the world. G7 leaders agreed to provide $20 million in aid to help stop the forest fires. That money was initially rejected by Brazil's president, accusing them of interference.
Very pleased to say that on the line from Salvador in Brazil, we have the political ecologist Felipe Milanez. Also in Brazil, from Brasilia, we have Adriano Jerezolimski from the indigenous-run Protected Forests Association. We will call him Pingo because he does so himself. With me in the studio, Sue Cunningham, trustee of Tribes Alive, who spent 6 months with her husband going down the Xingu River a few years ago. We'll talk about a book that's come out about that as well. And we also have Munadiah, Aftab, climate change activist at Islamic Relief. It's terrible what's happening. What are they saying? 5 football pitches or the equivalent area destroyed every single minute because of these fires. Felipe, let me come to you first of all. We heard in that report somebody say, yes, there have always been fires, but they're worse under Bolsonaro. How much worse?
It's much worse. It's incomparable to anything in the past. And technically, it's not that we have fire every year in the Amazon. We have fire in the savanna surrounding the Amazon. We have fires in the Amazon only when we have deforestation. And I haven't seen fires in the Amazon in the past 4 years. It's something new, the fire that's burning now in the Amazon. As it's something new, the high of killing of environmentalists in the past 3 years, and other rates of violence and destruction, and attacks on indigenous rights, indigenous people, violent expulsions of people in the Amazon. We're seeing something really, really violent, and we do need international attention to help us here in Brazil to save lives and forests.
Okay, Pingo, have you heard of something called fire days, when farmers are encouraged to start these blazes?
I was pretty close to this place when this happens. I was in a meeting in a Caipó village in southern Pará, in Cobencocre, when we heard about that. And there have been some investigations going on, and it's clearly like people who fell in power by the government statements, the president's statement, Bolsonaro's statement, saying that there would be not any more fines, and people who are like making crimes, doing illegal activities wouldn't be persecuted and so on, and they just felt encouraged to do whatever they want. And that's basically what happened.
Okay, we'll come back to you in just a moment to talk about what's happening that you've seen. But Sue, we were talking about the fact that until fairly recently, things were getting better. The deforestation was going the right way. In other words, there were more and more trees being planted. 2012, that's stopped. What's changed?
Well, you know, the fight's been going on since, God knows, the early 80s against deforestation one way or the other. In 1988, a new constitution came about, a lot of fights, but we managed it, and it was really good for indigenous peoples, and there was the laws that protected the forest and protected them. Unfortunately, over the years, that has had dips and falls and ups and downs, you know, of deforestation. It's the international markets. We have a lot to answer for in the West. And, you know...
And I'm going to talk, this is cattle and beef, and we're going to talk about that.
And wood, yeah.
Yeah.
And gold, you know. Anyway, but the point is, since Bolsonaro took over, as Pingu rightly said, his rhetoric is so vicious and so ridiculously open to really saying it's a free-for-all for everybody, just do what you want, and they do. So along the BR-163, which goes all the way from Cuiabá right up to...
This is a main road.
This is a main road that was part of the Trans-Amazonic, but it never got completely paved, and that's how deforestation was lessened or got worse. But the day of the fires was the bit nearer to Altamira, where it was devastating because people were really running for their lives. Even journalists who were photographing were told to get the hell out of there.
And there are, what, 1 million indigenous people in the Amazon. Your book is called Spirit of the Amazon, the Indigenous Tribes of the Xingu. That's a river basin, 2,500.
Runs parallel to that road.
How are their lives being affected?
Well, all along they are, because they're being squished, you know, by invaders, by forest fires, by illegal logging, and some of them are so... Because it's not the little man, it's not the little farmer who's just clearing a little plot just to survive, who's been there for maybe 20 years. No, this is mega business. These are massive farms. You know, you see a little sign on the road and it says, the main office is 48 kilometers in that direction. That's how long the farm is, so you can imagine how big it is. So, and these guys live in Sao Paulo, they live in Rio, and their kids go to school in Miami. They don't care what goes on, so they employ a few people to do their dirty work.
Okay, so but those are the people on the ground, Munadiah, and everybody, because this is open to you all to say whatever you want at any time. This isn't just about Brazil, it isn't just about the other countries, Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, etc., which have part of the Amazon. This is about the entire world because, as we said in the report, the lungs of the world, providing, 20% of our oxygen.
Yeah.
What is happening here in terms of its global impact?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to the Amazon forest fire, it's important that we don't see it in a vacuum. And I think another superficial conversation is that just blaming it on Brazil's president. If you look at the exploitation of resources, it's been done by our countries first. And it comes down to a geopolitical issue of development. All countries want to come to an economically and politically stable position. Now, we, France, the UK, we can stand here on our high footing and say, you know what, yeah, we need to do something about it. But that's because we've come to a point where our countries are stable. However, when you look at Brazil, I mean, I don't agree with the president at all. What he's doing is criminal.
But you sort of understand it?
I understand the perspective he's taking. The idea that he wants stability for his country, he wants economic growth, but the consequence of what? That's the question. The consequence of the death of innocent people. The point is, if you look at capitalism, if you look at the development of most countries, it's happened on exploitation. If we want to talk about climate change, if we want to talk about the rebuttal of climate change and looking for a possible solution, we have to talk about it as a global concern and how we can work on it as a global community rather than just individually or
okay. Felipe and Pingu, this is for either one of you or for both of you. Let's go to Felipe first. We're talking about, or Munadiah there mentions the fact that Bolsonaro wants to improve the lot, the wealth of his people. Whether that is across the country as a whole is questionable. It might just be for a few individuals. But doing so by, let's talk about beef exports, because more Brazilian beef is sold around the world than any other type of beef. The European Union last year imported 490 million pounds. I'm not quite sure what that is in dollars. 490 million pounds of beef. The demand is being fueled by people from the outside. You can't really blame the president for what's going on.
Well, I do believe that Bolsonaro wants to improve the life of Brazilians. He wants to improve the wealth of Phil. That's what he's pushing for, and that's truly a criminal government. When we talk about the international pressure, the international market, it's the system of extraction. So it's beef, soya, mining, hydroelectric power plant. We need to act globally against this expansion of capitalism on natural resources. So beef is expanding in the Amazon, but it's possible, let's say, to produce without deforestation is not only associated with beef production, but with land grabbing, with capitalism speculation in the Amazon. And in every single area, in every single fire, we have struggle. We have very violent social struggles here. It's not that Brazilians are against the Amazon. It's the elite of Brazil who wants to exploit the Amazon and kill the poor who live in the Amazon.
Is this not only going to get worse with this new trade agreement that's been signed between the European Union and South American countries, including Brazil, the Mercosur EU trade agreement?
Absolutely.
Sorry, yeah. You want to say something?
No, I'm just saying, have they signed it?
I believe it. I believe it's certainly happening.
And that's the thing, though. I think what frustrates me about this conversation is we talk about deforestation. We're constantly talking about Brazil. But why is there deforestation? It's because there's a demand, but from who? Because if we look at it, most of the resources that are being exploited isn't for the Brazilian people. It's for us. It's for our meat consumption. It's for our paper. It's for all of the resources that we need. It's for our gold. And the point is, if we want to talk about an active solution, we have to see, as the West, how do we reduce our demand? How do we increase education about the effects of climate change to the people that live here?
That's not going to put the fires out tomorrow,
No,
though, is it?
Even if you put out the fires, that's not going to these fires. That's not going to stop the fires because they'll just put fires in other places. You know, the thing is, they could be. Sorry, there could be more. There could be more better infrastructure and better agricultural policies within the areas that are already producing those things. You don't need to deforest more land. No. If the Indians, they're the only ones that are holding the forest up.
Yeah.
Well, let's go to Pingo about this, because you've come back, as you say, from a meeting to discuss the threats, different indigenous people coming together. What was the general feeling about how this can be countered?
Well, I think just going back to the first point, I think definitely she's right on saying that this is a global challenge. And everything is interconnected. And I think the big challenge is to prove that the forest, the stand forest, can support like the Brazilian development. And I think our government is just making a very basic mistake on thinking in a short term. I mean, those strategies of opening such huge areas of forests owned by traditional people and protected by traditional people to business, to soybeans, to beef, and etc. That is definitely not a good strategy. We're talking about the richest forest in the world, and we should find a solution to keep it stand and keep it providing all the environmental services it provides for the local people, for the Brazilians, and for the world. And I think that's the basic thing.
You see, there are two massive threats here. One is the long. Sorry to jump in, but one is the long-term threat globally and locally, and the other is the day-to-day threat for those people who are living there. How are these Amazonian Indians able to protect themselves, if at all?
Well, I mean, it has to be like an alliance of indigenous people. They've been very in a very hard context now, and they've been under very high pressure from, like the Kaipo, the people which I work for. There's been a lot of pressure from gold mining in their territories. some leaders are getting engaged in this activity, and if we don't help them providing alternatives, income generation alternatives, and also calling the government to enforce the law. I mean, what's happening now, it's our country is getting completely out of control. I mean, people are doing everything. I mean, there's disrespecting the environmental regulations and laws.
So you can't really expect a government that adopts that attitude, Sue, to do anything.
Well, that's the trouble. I mean, he's taking away people from FUNAI, the Indian agency. He's taking people away from IBAMA. The people that were there to protect the forest against fires so that they don't go all the way to the indigenous reserves, he's taken all those people away. So, the first line of defence is gone.
And he sacked the head of the country's own satellite
and the environmental minister
agency that showed how bad the fires were. He said, sorry, I don't believe you, you're out of a job.
Exactly. I got a video this morning about about people going on the streets of Brazil, and they were ordinary people. They weren't activists. They weren't, I don't know, just students or something. They were ordinary people, and they were all screaming and shouting, saying, the Minister of Environment has to go. It's the only way to keep the forest standing.
This is, I'm just throwing this one out here again. This is forward to your book written by Sting, well-known popular musician, shall we describe him as?
And defender of the forest.
30 years since you and he first went to the Xingu region, and he was talking about then how these new laws that have been put in place were massively encouraging. But he ends this introduction, this forward, by saying, demarcation of the lands has ground to a halt, and there are powerful moves to remove many of the rights recognised in the 1988 Constitution. Munadiah, I'll come back to you in just a moment to talk about the bigger picture. But you two in Brazil, Felipe, first of all, would there be any general outrage if those rights were removed, or would it just be very localised?
I hope we're going to have a revolt here in Brazil. Bolsonaro accused Macron as for being colonialist. In some part, yes. But Bolsonaro is being colonialist here. When you talk about indigenous rights, they are the natives from this land. It's horrible it's not only local people. I mean, we have to respect the ones who are from Brazil, truly from this country, from this territory. I'm white, settler, colonialist. I do need to respect the rights of the indigenous people as well as of black people. The rural black communities, the Lombo. Bolsonaro is not only attacking the Amazon. Bolsonaro is also attacking education, public universities such as the one that I'm working in. Bolsonaro is attacking science. Bolsonaro is attacking democracy.
Education.
It's a very criminal and violent government.
Okay.
And we are seeing many mobilizations in Brazil all over the country. And I hope we can get together mobilizations to defend life. It's really on defend life on Earth.
And Pingo, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, just Bolsonaro rhetoric, it's really using false information and polarizing the Brazilian society. We don't need to make more deforestation to develop Brazil. We do have a lot of open areas that can be intensified, and we can triple the beef production and the soya commodities in general, and we can develop with the areas we already deforested. And there's no need to put like indigenous territories and conservation units as an impediment, as something that it's avoiding Brazil to develop, to get wealthy, and etc. That's I think the basic mistake.
And I think I wanted to mention a point, reiterating some of the things that he said about the president, which is false information and not believing in climate change or science. And I mean, if that doesn't sound familiar to us from the leaders within our own countries, I think, and I keep putting emphasis on the global responsibility because it is needed. We have this conversation, especially when it comes to climate change. And like you said previously, there's this facade of activists, and it's not actual people that are getting involved in the conversation, which is the bigger problem. What it is now is that our conversation of climate change is in the vacuum of recycling boxes, when in fact, what climate change is a humanitarian crisis. People are dying. And how is it that we approach that? And if we don't talk about our political leaders and their neglect, we're not doing justice to the conversation. We're constantly talking about us, buying reusable water bottles, walking more, cycling more. And these are really necessary steps, but the layman can't make much of an impact in comparison to transnational corporations, in comparison to governments.
And you talk about the big organisations. You've got some
But those are very important points because it changes the mindset of the people. They start to think in different terms when they start to walk more. Or
Yeah, no, definitely.
Yeah.
But you've got 3 Amazonian Indians coming over to
4,
this.
yeah.
4. And the idea being that if you want to put pressure on the big names, the governments, the leaders of the world, then you have to get the message out there. So what are they going to be doing with you?
Well, as I only found out at 1:30 this morning, I haven't really had time to put a full program together, but we are appealing to all networks. Please invite us on, and the Indians will speak for themselves. And the same goes for politicians.
And you'll be trying to get the message out there with events and so on.
Yeah,
if somebody
we're
comes up and says,
planning
we'll
an
give you a
event.
hall.
Ah, that's another thing.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Listen, this book, Spirit of the Amazon, you can pre-order it. It's amazing, the photographs. I know this is a bit of a push for it, but I think it's well worthwhile.
It's to show what we're trying to save and what the richness of indigenous peoples can teach us and how important they are for keeping the forest standing.
Yeah, so in terms of the forest itself, how much do you think has disappeared? When I said 5 football pitches a second, Pingo, you first of all on that. I mean, that's rapid. But in total, over the last 40 years, how much of the rainforest has gone?
Around 20% of the Amazon basin is gone. But sorry, just to go back to your first question, I mean, about the meeting, we just participated and the solutions that the people are finding for themselves.
Yeah,
I think
please.
we're always trying to bring solutions from outside to the traditional people in the Amazon. I think most of the solutions are within their territories with the people who live there and who know their environment and the forest. And I think there are many solutions going on, and we have to look carefully for those solutions and expand them. There are really good examples of people who are finding even income generation initiatives with traditional activities that are expanding now, Brazil nuts, kumaru, handicrafts, and even tourism well conducted in many territories. And I mean, there are alternatives that actually conciliate forests and living in a wealthy environment and having the necessary income for the local communities. And that's what I think that's the point I want to make.
And they need money so that they can police their area because it's so vast. They need petrol. They need vehicles. You know, you can't really police such a. It's like, you know, painting the bridge. It's like the minute you finish, you've got to start again. So Pingo's right. They do need alternatives, and they're happening.
Should we just look at Brazil? It is public enemy number 1 in this. But when it comes to the rainforest, I mentioned some of the other countries: Peru, Colombia, Bolivia, Venezuela, Suriname, Guyana, French Guiana. Felipe, we're running towards the end of the program. Do we need also to examine what's happening elsewhere, or look to other countries for a great example?
Yes, we do. And the situation of Brazil is the worst. And Brazilian farmers are the worst here. They are invading Bolivia. They are invading Paraguay.
Yeah.
It's a system of production. So when you see the fires of Bolivia, you see behind them the hands of Bolsonaro and of Brazilian ranchers. And it's not only deforesting the Amazon, the problem, also damming the rivers, contaminating the rivers, and the genocide. When you see the fires of the Amazon, think about that behind that, there's indigenous people being killed. So it's the fires are associated with genocide.
And
it's important to know.
Direct confrontation, you know.
And this offer of 20 million to sort out the fires from Macron, was that just tokenism, or does anybody outside this room or a few activists actually really care?
No, I think to some part it's pocket change, to be fair, when it comes to trying to, you know.
And it's a Band-Aid.
Yeah, honestly. And if you look at, I mean, the countries that are contributing to the problem are now contributing a very small amount of money to fix the problem. I think when it comes to the Amazon specifically and the Amazon fire, what is important as well is to recenter the conversation on the people. So I think what you're doing is so necessary. We can have this conversation, but sometimes I feel like we're co-opting a conversation that doesn't belong to us. It's their lives at the end of the day. And with any humanitarian crisis, we usually go to the people that are affected. But for some reason, climate change, we have a few people, a few celebrities that talk on behalf of so many different communities. So it's really important now that we put emphasis on
I'm looking at these smiling faces here, and I'll ask the camera to get a picture of this. Will they and their descendants be around, or is this the end of the line for them?
They are fighting to the end. These are indigenous peoples from the indigenous park, and they actually asked us during the expedition. We visited 48 tribal communities. They were absolutely gloriously friendly, and they asked us and said, please tell our story. They can't all come out and say it, but I hope that with this book I'm saying something.
Yeah, it's amazing, and I make no apologies for giving it yet another plug. Spirit of the Amazon by Sue and Patrick Cunningham. You can pre-order it now, but you'll be able to buy it in the shops, one hopes, come the end of September.
Waterstones.
Fabulous. Do stay in touch. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, Pingu. Thank you, Felipe, for joining us from Brazil. Thank you, Munadiah, here for trying to give us an idea of the global size of this problem. We can see from the pictures the local size of the problem. What it's doing to us and to our planet is what we've been discussing here, and who's to blame on this edition of Roundtable. Thank you very much for joining me, each and every one of you. Thank you for watching the programme. I hope to have your company next time for another edition of Roundtable.